In this week's module, we will be examining the breakdown in political order following the 30 Years' War on the European continent and the specific responses to the challenges presented by the erosion of religious authority. The 30 Years' War, chronicled in Grimmelshausen's excerpt, was a series of conflicts between Protestants and Catholics, primarily in the German states and France. A devastating war that led to the death of nearly a third of the European population, the 30 Years' War eroded the position of political authorities due to their inability to control marauding armies. The two main political systems to develop out of this crisis were constitutionalism and absolutism. Constitutionalism was practiced in a minority of kingdoms, just two as you can see here on this slide. Absolutism was the primary response, practiced to some degree in the majority of European kingdoms in the 17th century. The development of constitutionalism comes from the same religious conflict of the 30 Years' War. But by looking specifically at the English example, we can chart how constitutionalism developed as a viable political philosophy. Much like the rest of Europe, England was divided between different versions of Christianity, despite the efforts to centralize religion with the establishment of the Anglican Church in the late 16th century. Anglicanism was the dominant religion in England, but for many Protestants it remained too close in practice to Catholicism. In turn, Catholics in England, who were tolerated, were shunned, which gave it an anti-authoritarian character. What happened in the 17th century was that these divisions led to violence as part of political reform. The catalyst for the revolutions of the 17th century in England was the change in the royal line. The ascent of the Stuart kings led to a change in terms of the English crown's involvement in religious affairs. King James I, of the King James Bible fame, was a pious man who wanted to return Anglicanism to the quote-unquote true faith of Catholicism. Although James was a popular king, his efforts to push England back to Catholicism met with resistance. James' successor, his brother Charles I, was subsequently challenged by a group of Protestants after he came to the throne in 1625, attempting to follow his brother's lead. These resistors were the Puritans, who wanted not only to not return to Catholicism, but also wanted to purify Anglicanism of the character of Catholicism. The Puritans had allies in Parliament, a body of nobles who in theory monitored the king's power, but had been marginalized in politics. The Puritans challenged the bishopric system, which had allowed Charles to place clergy in the Anglican Church who agreed with his ideas of returning to Catholicism. This challenge would lead to a direct political confrontation. The Puritans allied themselves with Oliver Cromwell, who himself formed a militia of dissenters and led them against Charles I in 1642. Cromwell's militia, known as the Roundheads, attacked loyalist forces who remained allied with the crown. The English Civil War ensued and was based primarily on religious divisions between Catholics and Anglicans against Protestant dissenters. Often this division manifested itself in a divide between town and country, as these two maps illustrate here. In the first map, the areas loyal to the king are to the north and west, while the more urban areas were loyal to Parliament and the dissenters. The second map shows the success of the Roundheads in defeating royal forces. Charles I was captured in 1648, ending the English Civil War, and he was placed on trial in 1649. Charged with despotism against the English people, he was executed. Unfair taxation was used as primary evidence for despotism, but religion played a motivating factor. With the execution of the king, the throne vanished to be replaced by a government known as the Commonwealth. England fell into a period of dictatorship under the leadership of Cromwell. His army, the New Model Army, was the key to his success in controlling the kingdom, as he used it to crush any challengers. Parliament, an important ally during the war, was marginalized thereafter. It was during this period that Hobbes wrote his Leviathan in reaction to the chaos of the Commonwealth. Across the English Channel, the French kings developed a system to govern based on enforcing a single religious community. Absolutism relied on the power of local elites in controlling specific areas, and some royal power was ceded to them. However, at the same time, French kings developed a strong bureaucracy staffed by commoners who were loyal to the king. Absolutism was ultimately predicated on the king having a strong public image. Louis XIV was the example of a successful combination of these characteristics. However, Louis faced a challenge during his childhood when a group of nobles, who were primarily Protestant, rose up against him to contest royal power. The Fronde, as this revolt was known, was unsuccessful, but it motivated Louis to distrust the nobility, and he would divide them throughout his reign. He did so by moving the seat of power away from Paris to Versailles, where he controlled the court intrigue and set nobles against one another for his favor. Absolutism would be a powerful response to the chaos of the religious wars and influential throughout the European continent. The Stuarts were in exile on the continent and remained there until the death of Cromwell in 1660. Parliament, fearing a continued dictatorship, used the opportunity to invite the Stuarts to return and rule again. The two kings in line, James II and Charles II, both had spent time in France and were influenced by the developing idea of absolutism as practiced by Louis XIV. This influence led to renewed conflicts between the Stuarts and Parliament, and the political situation soon resembled the earlier divisions before the English Civil War. Parliament again sought an alliance with forces to overthrow the Stuarts, this time within the Stuart family. Mary, the daughter of James II, was married to William of Orange, a Dutch stadtholder, and Parliament invited the couple to invade England and rule jointly. The subsequent quote-unquote glorious revolution chased the Stuarts from England and established a form of shared government between the Crown and Parliament. This type of government, constitutionalism, was enshrined in the English Bill of Rights in 1689. The Bill of Rights established William and Mary as the rightful rulers of England, but only because of the will of Parliament. It also limited royal power and increased that of Parliament. Lastly, it established a notion of a citizen, and not a subject, based on property ownership.